Welcome to Schweitzer Drive, a podcast where we explore what goes on between the generation of electricity and the light switch. Join Dave Whitehead as he interviews the entrepreneurs, innovators, and experts who are inventing the future of electric power.
Hi, I'm Dave Whitehead, CEO at Schweitzer Engineering Laboratories. And one of the things I usually do in the morning is I get up, feed my dogs, and then turn on the business news. And if you've been watching the business news lately, there are a bunch of IPOs happening, which got me to thinking of all the different ways you can run or operate a business, whether it's private equity or a public company or sole proprietorship. But there's another one that maybe doesn't get as much discussion, and that's employee ownership. And my guest today is SEL's Chief Business and Financial Officer, Joey Nestegard. Joey's an expert on the topic, and he actually worked to convert SEL to a 100% employee-owned company in 2009. Before taking on his current role, where he's SEL's Chief Business Officer, overseeing, among other things, the company's finances. Hi, Joey, and thanks for joining me today.
Thanks for having me, Dave.
Those of us who are lucky enough to work for an employee-owned company have a pretty good understanding of what exactly it is and its many benefits. Would you explain the business model to those who don't know about it? What is an ESOP? Maybe explain what ESOP stands for. And what does it mean for a company and the employee owners and customers related to ESOPs?
So an ESOP stands for Employee Stock Ownership Plan. It's like any other business. Company has a board, company has a management team, company has shareholders. The difference with an ESOP is the employees are the shareholders, at least in a company that's 100% employee owned. So these are intended to be a retirement plan in the United States, and they're governed by the Department of Labor. The shares are held in a trust that's managed by a trustee. In our case, we have an external trustee. In each employee's account in the trust, there's shares that are available for them when they retire. Each year, the company contributes a percentage of an employee's compensation into that account. Something that's really important to note about an ESOP versus other retirement plans is that all the contribution comes from the company. There's no employee investment. There's no employee match. It's pretty remarkable. Each year, depending on how the company plan is structured, there's a valuation that's done of the shares, whether they increase or decrease, and then that amount is available to an employee when they retire.
So how is the employee ownership different than, say, other business models, in terms of share allocation or who can buy shares or, all the maybe some of the nuances that go on between, say, a publicly traded company and how an ESOP works?
So in a public company, you have shareholders who can be internal or external to the company. There's a market for them. With an ESOP, it's a privately held company owned by the employees. Only the employees are owners, at least in 100% ESOP. The real difference comes in the culture of the company. So because you're an employee and the work you do has the impact on your stock price, there's a lot more connection between the individual worker and the growth of their company and the value of their company.
The stock allocation seems pretty equitable. I know I get asked by friends or relatives all the time if they could buy SEL stock, and the answer is
no.
How might they be able to do it?
Come work for us.
That's what I usually end up telling them too. It's like, it's pretty easy to get some stock. You just have to come work for us. SEL launched its employee stock ownership plan in 1994, and then it became 100% employee owned in 2009. Can you talk about why SEL's founder, Ed Schweitzer, decided to go this route?
Ed and I talked about this not too long ago. I was interviewed for an article by an economist, and at the time, he wanted to find a way for the employees to have a stake in the outcome, a slice of the pie, if you will. So he looked at the possibility of going public, profit sharing plans, other business models, and actually his father, who was the founder of E.O. Schweitzer Manufacturing, that's now our Lake Zurich operation, showed him the concept of employee ownership, and Ed started to read about it, learned about it. And it checked all the boxes. A company that could remain private, remain in control of the employees, and give folks a chance to have a stake in the outcome. I had working with Ed on that transaction in 2009 to go 100% was a fascinating experience. I didn't know that much about ESOPs before that time. And I remember going up to his office and looking at the math and how the modeling worked to make us go from whatever we were 49% employee owned to 100% employee owned. And with the S Corp tax treatment, it was an absolute no-brainer because the company could be sold to the employees without impacting the operations of the company, and we could buy it back over time. It was incredible. It was a no-brainer.
That's my understanding of ESOPs. One of at least the short-term benefit that some individuals might consider is because, say, it's a sole proprietorship and the owner passes away, and let's say they have a lot of assets and there's a lot of tax liability, that the ESOP provides a way that the company doesn't need to be dissolved to pay off the tax debt or something. Maybe you could talk a little bit about that.
Right. A lot of folks learn about ESOPs as they're thinking about how to transition away from their business, right? Maybe it's a family company and they don't have a child who wants to take over, and they're like, okay, what do I do? Do I sell it to somebody else? What can I do? And that's when a lot of folks see an ESOP, and for us, it was kind of unique to be 100% employee owned because it gave the employees a future certain, our customers, our community, our suppliers. They knew that we were all going to be here as a company owned by our employees beyond Ed and the current shareholders.
And just to point out, Ed is still here.
Ed is still here.
I still make
all the time.
I make the joke, I am sure I will retire before Ed ever retires.
Yes.
Right? It was Ed is always thinking about the next step. I'm sure he's a master chess player because he really thought about how to make sure that SEL remains able to serve our customers even when he's no longer here day to day. So that's really, really cool. One of the incredible benefits of the employee ownership model is how it can impact a person's retirement. And how is this different than other retirement plans?
I mentioned earlier, so one of the biggest benefits is all of the contribution comes from the employer. So there's no match, there's no employee required contribution in order.
Real quick then, how do you calculate an ROI on something like that then if I'm dividing by 0?
It's very easy, Dave, very easy.
It's big.
So the employer puts in all the contribution. The gains or losses on the shares are subject to the fluctuation of the stock price. But in addition to that, most ESOPs also have a traditional 401k. They may not have a match. We don't have a match because we put all of our contribution into the ESOP. We're a member of Employee-Owned S Corporations of America, and the National Center for Employee Ownership did a study of ESCA companies a few years ago, and 97% of the companies in ESCA also have a 401k. So there's multiple options for a person. And the really cool thing is, so for us, our participants can start in the ESOP beginning when they're 18 years old. So you can have somebody graduate from high school, they don't know what they want to do, they come to work as an assembler or some other position in the company, they get to 1,000 hours, work here a year, and they start to build a retirement, which is just remarkable. And they don't have to put anything into it, but they start to learn about retirement savings. It's really cool.
And we've been doing this since 1994, and since what do we say, 2009, it's been a 100% ESOP. We have had a handful of folks that started on our manufacturing floor that have been able to retire as millionaires, which I think is just an incredible story. And here's an interesting fact that I didn't know until you and I were sitting down and talking about that, but that there are quite a few studies that have shown that employee-owned companies outperform the S&P 500, certainly perform better than during a recession. Why do you think that is?
To prep for this podcast, I read a few studies over the weekend. It's and there's really not one thing. There's a lot of different things. It's ESOP companies tend to be more financially stable. They tend to be more conservative. The behavior of the company is different. So I first started being involved in ESCA in 2009, 2010, and I went to a conference, and there was a bunch of companies in a room talking about how they had managed through the economic downturn, 2008, 2009. And a lot of those were manufacturing companies and construction companies. And they were talking about how people had volunteered to take pay cuts within their company so that they could maintain the total workforce until the business started to pick up. And then they were ready. They had their employees trained and ready to go when the downturn went away. So it's just things like that. And you add up enough of them and you start to get companies that outperform traditional non-ESOP companies.
That's really probably a great example of ownership, right? Only owners would think in terms of like, maybe I cut back on my salary, recognizing, it's for the better good of the company. And then certainly when good times are had, that profit and that, benefit is then shared with the employee owners again. We have a handful of employee meetings, and I'm often asked about the ESOP and what my thoughts are on it. And I find the ESOP to be pretty incredible in the fact that every day as an employee owner, when I show up to do something, it directly affects my retirement. I have lots of options, right? I could go out onto the market and say buy Apple stock or something like that, or Microsoft stock, and by doing that, I am entrusting my retirement to Tim Cook at Apple, or folks at Microsoft, so that hopefully they'll come into work every day, trying to better the company, that will somehow, a derivative off or something like that affect my retirement plan. Whereas the ESOP model turns that just, you're no longer a derivative off. Everything you do directly affects the outcome of your thing. It's really a powerful concept.
One of the common questions we get is, okay, we're employee owned. Why don't I get a say in what assets we buy and things we do? And at the end of the day, there's still a management team that makes has to make decisions in the best interest of the company and the shareholders, right? So that doesn't go away just because you're an ESOP. The thing, at least we do, different than public companies, we're really open with our shareholders. We talk monthly about what's going on in the company. We share financial updates. People have just way more information, and the ability to send you an email or call you on the phone anytime they want. Just ask a question is different than you couldn't email or call. Well, you probably could call Tim Cook, but I don't know if he'd respond.
I don't think he'd take my call, and that's okay. You're right, and maybe we're not like all ESOPs, but our treatment of the employee owners, right? We really do think of everybody as an employee owner. There, as we mentioned in other podcasts, we have every Friday we have a business meeting. We call it a Friday lunch, where we'll buy the employees a lunch, but we'll also talk about all the various aspects of what's going on with their company. And then once a month, we have one of your finance folks get up and tell us the details of how the company is performing, right? And I think that all comes back to culture and us owning the company, which I think is really, really unique. The insight that every employee owner has into the company, I think is certainly phenomenal. I couldn't tell you what's going on at Apple right now, and I'm sure they wouldn't let me know what's going on. But you have that flexibility and that option, I think, with being an employee-owned company. You touched on how employee ownership benefits a company's customers. Can you share some of those examples of what really is a benefit to a company buying products or services from SEL because we're an employee-owned company?
Great quality and customer service. It's not unique to employee-owned companies, but I think inherently folks are more engaged. They recognize, like you said a while ago, that my quality impacts my customer, right? The things I do every day impact my retirement, so they're more aware and more conscious of all of those things, including quality. The other thing I think is, ESOPs are more resilient, more financially, if they're financially strong, they're going to be there for the long term for their customers. We're not chasing quarterly earnings like a public company. That's a big deal. We make long-term decisions, right? I don't know if you've talked in prior podcasts about our challenges with some of our control houses, and we made what I think for a public company or even other private companies would have been a hard decision to spend a lot of money to repair them, was an easy decision for us because we knew it was best for our customers in the long term. And I think that's unique about an ESOP.
Yeah, I'd have to echo that a little bit. We are not beholden to the quarterly forecasts or analyst meetings or any of those other things. In fact, this is the end of the year, and probably like a lot of companies, we're in the process of wrapping up our plans for what we specifically want to accomplish in 2021. But I think more importantly, it's really that 5-year horizon too. Where do we want to be in 5 years? And of course, trying to guess where you're going to be in 5 years is a difficult thing. But it really allows us to the freedom, I think, of instead of being so concerned about what the next quarter looks like. I learned a term from Joey. David, it's just timing, right? And whether something happened in Q1 or spilled a little bit over into Q2, it really doesn't matter when we look at the long-term, health and viability of the company. Rather, we should be looking more in 5 years on what things do we want to invent? Where do we want to help our industry at? And I can't agree with you more that, having this employee-owned concept and having a way to look more than just beyond one quarter is really powerful and empowering, I think, too, on how we go about making decisions for the company.
We benchmarked our finance team versus a public company finance team a couple of years ago, and it was interesting that the CFO of that company said he walks around with a binder that has the annual operating plan in it, and if it's not in the plan, it doesn't happen. That's definitely not how we work.
Wow.
Definitely not how we operate.
Wow. Yeah, I don't think I'd want to operate that way. So we've talked a lot about benefits to ESOPs. Are there any additional benefits an ESOP might provide in keeping the company in the hands of employee owners versus being, say, an acquisition target for another company? And what are your thoughts on that?
So as I was reading some of those studies over the weekend, a gentleman named Jared Bernstein, who's an economist who worked under Joe Biden when he was vice president, he made an interesting point in a study about the study was about income inequality and how ESOPs help with income inequality. But he was talking about resiliency of ESOPs. And I think it relates to M&A because a lot of public companies use acquisitions as R&D, right? And when you're a more financially stable company, you're able to reinvest in yourself more consistently with probably higher dollars. And I think being an ESOP has allowed us to continue to do that. And year over year, we spend a lot of money on R&D, which will, I think, help us outperform non-ESOP companies over the long term and help us remain an independent company, probably outperforming folks. You think about it right now, people are buying tons of folks because interest rates are super low and they get money super cheap. But if that's your strategy and rates go up, how do you keep doing that? Whereas a company who we're used to reinvesting a certain amount of our profits and being more resilient, we're ready for the long term.
Yeah, that's interesting. I hadn't thought too much about, maybe a company that likes to acquire other companies' strategy, but it makes a lot of sense, right? I can see the upside to it is you could have, you're the big company, you just watch and look at what others are doing. If you see something that perhaps fits into your portfolio, you can go acquire that technology, which I guess on the short term is kind of interesting, right? You get some immediate gratification for technology that maybe help produce it. But then I think you have the struggles too of integrating somebody else's culture or technology. If you're going to keep the people, maybe you don't. But then I often question, do you have a deep understanding of that technology that you're buying, right? So maybe this is the hare and the tortoise discussion, right?
Absolutely.
It's quick to buy it kind of thing, but the slow and steady, I think, always wins the race. We've certainly talked about a lot of benefits to the ESOP. Can you think of a downside to the ESOP business model?
Well, like any business model, there's definitely companies that don't survive as an ESOP. Sometimes it's because the company overpaid, maybe had some bad advisors, or the model didn't fit well, or the company just didn't succeed. So that is a downside, but that's a downside with any business model. I think something some of us has talked about over time is if you talk to financial advisors of people who are in an ESOP, one of the downsides could be that a lot of folks' retirement savings is tied up in one thing or primarily in one thing, and that's an ESOP. And that's a function of what's frankly great about the model is the contributions are generally much higher than you would get with a 401k. The companies are generally more successful, so people's retirement grows, and therefore their portfolio is disproportionately made up of their ESOP company. So while that can be seen as a bad thing by financial advisors, I think most folks who have an ESOP account and retire would be happy with that challenge. I think it also, it underscores the importance of the planning by the company. We all have a duty to take care of the company for the long term so that we can pay people in their retirement. That entire diversification challenge it's called a repurchase obligation. That's the future value of everything you have to buy back from your future employees. That's one of the things that I wake up and think about every single day is how are we going to make sure we plan for that? And there's a lot of people that can help. There's a lot of savvy folks in the industry, great valuation firms, trustees. I mentioned the National Center for Employee Ownership, ESOP Association, ESCA. There's a ton of information out there for folks that are interested in this business model. The upsides are way, way, way bigger than the downsides, and the downsides, if well managed, can be mitigated.
Yeah, I've heard the argument about you got all your eggs in one basket, but I think it comes back to the notion that everything I do every day when I show up to work helps keep that basket intact. And based on what we've done for the last 20 years or so with 26 years or so since Ed started the first version of the ESOP is, where would you take, you can divest right out of the ESOP, right? Mm-hmm. There are rules that allow you to do that. Where would you go put that money? We just talked about that ESOPs generally outperform the S&P 500. S&P 500 is probably the most safest and probably a good return if that's your alternative versus trying to pick individual stocks or something like that. I still make the argument when I get asked, it's like, okay, take your money out. Where are you going to put it to make the return you're going to get? And something you can actually control, because if you do a good job, your company is going to succeed and your retirement account will go up and up and up. So
exactly.
It's really it's fun to talk about. Okay, so I want to ask you that this final question then is, Peter Drucker said, "Culture eats strategy for breakfast." Will you share some of the examples of how employee ownership affects company culture?
One of our values is ownership, right? And ownership is just part of what happens every day in every part of the company. And I asked Ed not that long ago, did he have ownership as a value before we were in ESOP or after? And he said he didn't remember, and he wasn't sure if it really mattered. And I think that's an example. I mean, we're all owners, and I think that's a big part of our strategy. We think long term. Everybody has a vested interest, and I think the fact that we're a values based company that has ownership in it is part of why we're different.
I hadn't thought about it too much till I thought about it quite a bit, but it made me think a little bit more when you were talking. One of the values, or I think what drives our culture is, the idea of how do we go about serving our customer. And I think when you put it in that context, and the other thing is, Ed, do business the way your mom would want you to do it, right? You put the customer first and you do the right thing by the customer. I think that drives down everything when we're talking about culture and everything else. And then ultimately, we talk about, if we do all of those things right, we're going to grow the company. If we grow the company, then we're going to grow the ESOP value. So I think it all comes back to this. How do you delight the customer? And if you're doing that, if that's really why you get out of bed every day is to make a customer happy, I think all the rest of it stuff takes care of itself.
Yep, absolutely.
Well, Joey, ESOPs, fascinating topic. I really do hope that more ESOPs happen. We're recording this the end of November, and I am pretty much of the opinion, you're the expert, correct me if I'm wrong, but ESOPs are not a bipartisan topic. It is a partisan thing. I think both sides of the aisle, have a lot of respect for the ESOP model and all it can do for, working people like us.
Yeah, I have the opportunity to go on Capitol Hill and talk to different people, and I talk to folks on both sides of the aisle, in the House and in the Senate and all over, and both of them are like, this is something that Congress got right. How do we make more ESOPs? And I think that's why we're part of ESCA. That's why we're parts of these organizations, and we'll keep talking about the business model.
Well, that's great. And if you have any questions about ESOPs, call Joey or send him an email.
Happy to take any call.
All righty. Thanks, Joey, and looking forward to talking to you in the future.
Thanks, Dave.
Thank you for stopping by Schweitzer Drive. Join us again as we learn about, explore, and celebrate electric power. For more information about the show, please visit selinc.com/Schweitzer Drive.